Braves play.
Oh yeah, we love the Braves.
Uh-huh. Yeah, we'd go down there. We'd drive down there overnight, then drive back home. It'd be 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning. Sometimes when we get back home,
Mhm.
we'd go down. But we liked the ball. We liked baseball back then. Well, I still like it pretty good.
Oh yeah, me too.
It's about got out of hand though, like everything else.
Right. Hey, so what year were you born in, Papa?
What year
Uh-huh.
was what?
What year were you born?
Oh, what year? I was born August the 16th, 1926, in Natty Fort, Georgia.
Mm-hmm.
That's a little about 4 miles due north from right here. There's a little community up there where Grandpa Hampton owned the River Farm, and it was called Natty Fork.
Mm-hmm.
The roads forked there and went towards Grandpa's house,
Mm-hmm.
and went on west, and they called it Natty Fork. I don't know why it don't even exist anymore. The Pupwood Company bought all that land there. It was on the Connoissauga River,
Mm-hmm.
but they bought it all, and they got. I reckon as far as I know, they still own it.
What can you remember about growing up during the Great Depression?
About Grandma doing what?
What do you remember about growing up during the Great Depression?
Trying to do. I didn't understand that.
I'm sorry.
What? No, you.
What do you remember about growing up during the Great Depression?
About grandmother.
The Great Depression.
Oh, what do I remember about the Great Depression?
Yeah. What? Because how old were you then?
Okay. Oh, Lord. Well, I growed up during the Great Depression.
I know.
It started in 1929.
Mm-hmm.
The Great Depression did, and I was 3 years old, I think, when it started. And
You were born into it.
Yeah, and I didn't know too much about it at that time. I was too young. But anyway, later, I knew quite a bit about it because times was really hard. It was hard on everybody.
Mm-hmm.
And people they had a problem keeping enough food to eat.
Yeah.
For people. You couldn't, there wasn't no jobs or anything. People didn't have no places to work on the farms, and it didn't pay nothing much.
Mm-hmm.
And in sawmills, there's quite a few sawmills around that time, but it was really a hard time on everybody.
Mm-hmm.
And some people, it was really harder than others because a lot of men that had back then that had 4 or 5 kids, they left their wives and the kids, and they'd hobo, get on a freight train and ride and go to other cities in the United States, and they'd never come back. Some of them never did come back.
Wow.
I know my wife's grandmother, she had 5 kids, Big Mama did.
Mm-hmm.
And the baby was 2 years old, and they lived over Delegay, and he left her and went to Grant Pass, Oregon. And he never did come back. Out here, and the baby was only 2 years old when he left. And he, in 1936, found out later by his oldest daughter that he had adopted a boy out in Grant Pass, Oregon. And when that boy got grown, he killed him
Oh, wow.
in 1936. And Annie, that was his oldest daughter, and her husband. In 1936, they drove a car to Grant Pass, Oregon.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know why they did that. They said they really had a hard time getting out there because back in 1936, it was mostly dirt roads, I think.
Yeah.
There wasn't no paved roads, very few miles of paved roads. And it's gone quite a while driving from here to Grant Pass, Oregon.
Hey, what did your parents do during the Depression?
Well, during the Depression, we lived on farm most all the time. We lived on farms, and they growed good gardens and
Mm-hmm.
stuff like that. And I always had a good milk cow.
Uh-huh.
And so Daddy used to say that a family that had a good milk cow, that was half of their living.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess it was, and you get thinking about it, because you get a lot of stuff from a good milk cow.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, I think the people that lived on the farms ate better than the people that didn't
Yeah.
live on farms back then. But anyway.
Is that how you learned how to farm?
Oh, yeah. I started picking cotton and when I was 5 years old. And Mother made me a pick sack out of a 50-pound bag of flour. We used to get flour in 50-pound bags. And she used the flour sack and made me a pick sack out of it. And that's what I picked cotton in. It took me all day to fill it up with cotton. But anyway, we had it pretty rough, mostly.
Mm-hmm.
I remember in 1932, we lived down there on Duval Road. There's a family that lives, their names was Graham. I was 6 years old when we moved down there. And they'd come out by our house, and their daddy and mother had left them.
Mm.
And they was hungry and starving, and they're just small kids.
And their parents left them?
Oh, yeah.
Mm.
And Mother, of course, we didn't have too much to eat either.
Yeah.
But if she had any bread or pound of cornbread cooked or anything, she'd give it to them.
Yeah.
They was begging for food. They're starving.
Yeah.
See, back then, the government didn't help people. And if the families didn't help them, a lot of times they really went hungry and they starved a lot.
Man.
Got real hungry. There's plenty of money, but there's only a few people had it
Yeah.
back then.
Uh-huh.
Well, I'll tell you, there wasn't no jobs or nothing. It was rough times.
Yeah,
I
I
just
bet.
can't tell you how bad it is because I was just a kid.
Yeah.
But it was really bad, hard times.
And you had 6 brothers and sisters, right?
Well, at that time I didn't. When we lived down there on Duval Road,
Uh-huh.
that's when I started school.
Uh-huh.
And I was 8 years old when I started because we had to walk from there to Chetworth Grammar School.
Mm-hmm.
And there's about a 2 or 3 mile walk, and Mother didn't want me walking when I was 6 years old to school from Duval Road to Chetworth.
Uh-huh.
And so she waited till Aunt Lou got old enough to go, and me and her both then would go. And sometimes Daddy had a buggy and a mule, and sometimes he'd take us to school in that buggy and mule.
That's special.
Down to Chetworth Grammar School.
Did you ever have to walk in the snow?
And if it snowed, we'd stay at home. We didn't go. We didn't go to school. And I almost put Mother and Daddy in jail because I was 8 years old and hadn't started me school.
Really?
Truant officers, they'd come out there and get on to Mother and Daddy pretty often. Won't know why. Well, there wasn't no school buses back then.
Yeah.
And she said, I'm not starting my son now to school. I'm not letting him walk from here to Chatsworth.
Yeah.
We had to go through the woods too. That's where we'd go. Through
Wow.
the woods. But
Ask him till about when.
it's just rough times.
What about when Genevieve was born?
Well, now we lived at Crandall then,
Uh-huh.
but we lived in a real nice house in Crandall. We moved to Crandall from Chatsworth in 1937. And Daddy, but before then though, I'd have to tell you, before that story, when we lived at Duval Road, Daddy, he got a job on a rolling store for Uncle Mont Roberts, lived in Chatsworth. And Daddy got a job, he had a rolling store, and Daddy got a job driving a rolling store. You know, back then they had rolling stores that had routes, and they'd go through the county and go and sell stuff, you know. And of course they traded a lot of things with farmers out in the country.
Uh-huh.
Like they'd trade eggs for coffee, or they'd trade chickens. They had a rack on the back of the rolling store where you could put chickens.
Uh-huh.
And they'd trade chickens and eggs for food,
Uh-huh.
for coffee and snuff and smoking
Snuff.
tobacco and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Something that they wanted, you know.
Yeah.
They'd do that a lot. So he did that a while. And then he got a job putting out bedspreads and for Frank Westfield at Chatsworth.
Uh-huh.
He had a big store down there at Chatsworth, Frank did. And he also had women in there turfing bedspreads. And Daddy got a job on putting out bedspreads for women to turf out in the country.
Uh-huh.
And so Frank had owned a farm over there, the other side of Holly Creek Church. And Daddy bought that farm from him over at Holly Creek. And we moved from down there on Duval Road over to Holly Creek in 1934. And we had a good house over there. And it had 25 acres of land and a big, huge water mill.
Wow.
Where you ground meal. Daddy ground meal on a water wheel.
Uh-huh.
We had a pond and a race, they called it, went down to the top of the water wheel and had a trap door. When you wanted the mill to run, you had to pull that trap door and let the water run into them dippers on that big wheel, and it was 20 foot high.
Wow.
And they'd start turning the rocks in to grind the meal.
Uh-huh.
So Daddy, he got to doing that, got to buying everybody's corn in the community that wanted to sell it, and he'd grind it and take it to Dalton and sell it to them people that had supermarkets over at Dalton
Uh-huh.
back in 36. But he was also putting out bedspreads, and I'd go with him. I was 10-year old, and at the time we lived over there, and I'd go with him a lot of times. And he had different routes that he'd run.
Mm-hmm.
And he had a car wreck. He had a 34 Chevrolet 4-door sedan that he delivered bedspreads in, and he had a wreck, tore it up in 1936.
Uh-huh.
And he bought a 1936 Ford pickup, a brand new one, a red, is solid red. And that's what I learned to drive on. When he'd be at the house asleep and I'd get out there in the truck, I was 10-year-old. Had an automatic switch down here on the steering column, and I'd push that on, and I'd start that truck, and I'd back it up and pull it up as straight shift.
So you taught yourself how to drive at 10 years old.
Yeah, and I'd back it up and pull it up. Of course, Daddy's in bed asleep. He done a lot of going late of the evening, you know, and of the night.
Uh-huh.
About them bedspreads, but he made good money then. He was making good money. But the spread companies and all, they started getting these single needle machines in. And so they started making bedspreads with single needle machines, and the people that made them, they had to go to the companies in Dalton and also Chatsworth. Frank Westfield, he had them in Chatsworth. And so that cut out the spread hauling. People go in like Daddy, and there's several people putting out bedspreads.
Uh-huh.
But that stopped that.
Yeah.
So that cut him out on that. He had a good job there, you know.
Uh-huh.
He was making good money back then. And then he traded that farm to George Gregory for a house in Crandall and a big store down there in Crandall. And so we moved to Crandall in one of the nicest houses in Crandall.
Nice.
It was really a nice house that he got from George Gregory.
What year was that?
That was in 1937. And I walked behind the cow from Holly Creek Church to Crandall and had a man leading the cow. We got up there to Granny's house. Granny and Grandpa lived in Crandall. And I starved to death because it was about 3 o'clock in the day and I hadn't ate anything. I was 11-year-old and barefooted, I think, too. And I told Granny, I went in when we got there about 3 o'clock that afternoon. I said, Granny, I'm about starved to death. I ain't had nothing to eat. But if she fixed me something to eat real quick. I let that guy just go on, who I don't even remember who he was, that led the cow.
Yeah.
But anyway, we